Hey guys, it's Jay from Track Attack here, and I'm really excited to bring you a brand new segment on our channel called Mod or Myth. So in this segment, we ask the age-old question, do performance modifications actually work, or really are they just a myth? Well, what we're going to do is we're actually going to take some real-world data on the racetrack and on the dynos to actually go and see if they actually make a difference. So to start, we're going to need a car, but not just any car. We're going to need something that has a track-based focus that gives us a really great platform to work off of.
Enter the Porsche Cayman GT4. A potent track machine that comes with a 3.8-liter flat-six engine making 385 horsepower and made it to a good old-fashioned 6-speed manual gearbox.
So we got the car. Now what are we going to do first? Well, most enthusiasts like to start with power, and we're no different.
One of the Achilles heels of the GT4 is its long gearing coupled with its neutered 3.8-liter flat-six engine, which comes from the Carrera S. There's a very well documented torque dip between 4,500 and 5,000 RPM, which is likely due to the Porsche detuning the ECU and reducing the throttle body down to 74mm from the 82mm you would typically find on the GT3. This has resulted in a drop in horsepower from 425 horsepower typically found on the Carrera S to the 385 horsepower that comes standard with the GT4. So we decided to see if we could reclaim some of that horsepower with some good old-fashioned bolt-on mods. We hit up our good friends at Johnston Research and Performance, Canada's largest aftermarket parts supplier, who had the parts we needed in stock. So we started with a set of BMC air filters. Now these cost about $250, and while it should help the engine breathe a bit better, we weren't really expecting any material gains, other than maybe some better induction noise and some throttle response. Next up, we have the IPD Competition Plenum. This allows us to bolt up the 82mm GT3 Throttle Body, which in turn should help increase the intake air volume and hopefully help mitigate some of the mid-RPM torque dip that we talked about earlier. And finally, the tried and true Cobb Accessport. Now this comes with the Stage 1 off-the-shelf tune which we'll be using, and we're hoping that it'll tie together all the other mods and yield some strong gains both on the dyno and on the track. The total cost for the entire kit was around $3,800. Now with the parts in hand, we headed over to our friends at Mantis Autosport, our resident Porsche shop who has years of experience building and tuning some of the fastest P cars in the area. The plan was to have the Mantis team do an initial baseline dyno and then re-dyno the car as they installed the parts to see what the gains were. So first up was the Cobb Accessport, which was a simple install via the car's OBD port. Then we did the IPD Plenum and the GT3 Throttle Body with the BMC air filters. All in all, it was about a 4-hour professional install, with the majority of that time actually spent installing the IPD Plenum and the GT3 Throttle Body. So the results were quite interesting. On a completely stock 981 GT4, we were able to achieve 346 horsepower on the dyno at peak, which is right in line with what we usually see on most stock 981 GT4s. And it's right in line with the 385 horsepower that's rated at the flywheel, assuming 14 to 15% driveline loss. With the Stage 1 kit installed, the horsepower jumped to 367 horsepower at peak, which is about a 21 horsepower gain and something you're definitely going to feel. So we're really excited to see how it translates on the track from a performance and a lap time perspective. The other interesting thing is the gains at the mid and upper RPM range, with a 29 horsepower gain at 5,000 RPM and a 32 horsepower gain at 6,600 RPM from the baseline to the Stage 1 upgrades. This definitely shows that the modifications do make a pretty sizable difference compared to stock. So from a torque perspective, you'll notice a pretty similar theme here. The stock vehicle put down 281 foot-pounds on its baseline run, and after the Stage 1 upgrades, the power jumped to 307 foot-pounds, or a 26 foot-pound gain, which shows another really impressive gain from just bolt-on mods. What you'll also notice is the gains are through a pretty broad range of the RPM band, starting from about 4,400 RPM with gains all the way up to 6,700 RPM. So this should translate at the track to faster top speeds on the straightaways and hopefully lower lap times. So with the proven gains on the dyno, we were anxious to take the car out to our home test track, Toronto Motorsports Park in Cayuga, to do some real-world testing. So on a rather cold and damp day, we set some baseline lap times before we added any of the modifications. The testing methodology we used was 2 warm-up laps and the best lap out of 3 hot laps. The GT4 put down a really respectable time of 1:19.4 on a set of 4-year-old Michelin Cup 2 tires and an ambient track temperature of about 8 Celsius or around 46 Fahrenheit. The long gearing of the GT4 was definitely evident along the 2 long straights at Toronto Motorsports Park, where you really had to wait for the car to hit its 7,800 RPM red line, and you can definitely feel the torque dip around 5,000 RPM. So with the new mods installed, we headed back to the track on a sunnier day, but the temperature and the conditions were broadly the same at 7 Celsius or about 45 Fahrenheit, and there was actually some standing water on the track, which made it pretty equal to the previous damp day of testing we had. So first off, the intangible differences were actually quite evident. The car certainly pulled more cleanly through the entire rev range, and the torque dip was pretty much unnoticeable after the upgrades. Coming out of the slower corners, the extra torque definitely helped to make up for the tall gearing, and there was a lot more throttle management required to manage the wheel slip mid-corner. The additional power made the rear end even more playful, and the ability to rotate the car with the throttle seemed a lot easier. All in all, it was a noticeable improvement, but it wasn't massive or what I would call significant. Now on to the empirical data. There are 3 key measurable differences that certainly prove the mods did make a difference on the track. The first was the average top speeds I was able to hit on the main straight at Toronto Motorsports Park. Prior to the upgrades, we were hitting an average of 184 kilometers an hour, and using the exact same braking zones in very similar conditions, we were able to bump that average up to 187 kilometers an hour. That's a 3 kilometer an hour difference, which may not sound like much, but it does make a difference in overall lap times and is a measurable difference. The second was where I was shifting into 4th gear on the main straight. As you can see in the freeze frame here, I'm shifting a full 5 to 7 feet earlier with the modifications. This would correlate with the higher top speeds we are hitting, and is definitely a good measure of the difference. We also noticed that going through corners 2 and 6 at TMP, I was able to hit the rev limiter after the modifications, where before I wasn't. And finally, the main quantitative measurement, lap times. Pre-modifications, we were able to hit the 119.4 we previously mentioned, and after the mods, drum roll please, we were able to squeeze out a 118.7, which is over half a second gain in lap time. This is really significant as we're using the same driver in very similar conditions, and we're getting very consistent results.
So I have to say, based on our testing, the power modifications we added to this 981 GT4 Cayman definitely made a pretty big difference. Not only on the dyno, but on the racetrack as well with real world data. So very, very impressive, and definitely a worthwhile modifications, for any Cayman GT4 owner. So that's it for me. Hopefully you guys liked the new segment. Please like and subscribe if you did, and make sure you stay tuned because we've got plenty more planned in terms of upgrades for this vehicle and some more testing and others as well. Thanks again, and take care.